Willow Hartley was 26 when her parents handed her the one thing nobody in the family wanted: the crumbling farmhouse her grandfather Silas had left behind. Her older brother, Beckett, received the renovated properties, investments, and everything that looked valuable. Willow got a cardboard box in a house everyone called rotten. She stood barefoot in the gravel driveway, holding that box against her chest while tears blurred her mother's face. Inside were only three things: an old photograph of Willow fishing beside Silas when she was 7, a dying fern he'd given her before college, and a small wooden keepsake he'd carved himself. "Your brother has always been responsible," Adeline said, adjusting her blouse. "This house is really the only thing that makes sense for you." Desmond said nothing. He simply looked toward Beckett's new luxury SUV parked nearby. Willow wanted to scream. Instead, she swallowed the hurt. She had spent her whole life feeling like the child nobody expected much from. Maybe that was why they thought giving her a broken farmhouse was punishment enough. She placed the box carefully in the back seat, wiped her cheeks, and looked once more at the old house. What they didn't know was that beneath that worthless land, Silas had been hiding something that would soon change everything. That first night, Willow didn't cry. She had already cried enough in the driveway, enough for one day, enough for a lifetime. Instead, she walked through the farmhouse with a flashlight in her hand, listening to every creak of the old wooden floors. The house smelled like dust, cedar, and the faint coffee scent that somehow still reminded her of Silas. She stopped in the kitchen and ran her fingers across the scratch table where her grandfather had once let her sit on the counter and steal pieces of warm pie. "Don't tell your mother," he used to whisper with a grin. Willow smiled through the ache in her chest. Then she walked into his bedroom. Everything looked untouched. His old chair sat beside the window. His reading glasses rested on the nightstand. A faded sweater hung behind the door. Willow opened the closet, searching for nothing in particular, when her fingers caught against a loose floorboard. She froze. After prying it upward, she found a small metal tin covered in dust. Her heartbeat quickened. Inside was a single folded letter. The handwriting on the envelope made her knees weaken. Willow Bug. Nobody had called her that since she was 6. She sat on the closet floor and unfolded the paper with trembling hands. "My sweet Willow Bug. If you're reading this, then the world has finally seen you the way I've always seen you. Not last. Not less. Just last to be noticed." Her vision blurred. He kept reading. "Your parents may tell you this house is all you were worth. They may tell you to sell it quickly. Please don't. Not until you understand what is underneath this land, and underneath you." Willow read that sentence again. Then again. Her grandfather had known. Somehow, Silas had known exactly what would happen after he was gone. She pressed the letter against her chest and finally broke down, burying her face in her hands. But these weren't tears of humiliation anymore. For the first time in years, Willow felt something she had almost forgotten existed. She felt seen. The weeks that followed should have been about grief, but for Willow, they became a quiet battle between what her family believed she deserved and what her grandfather had believed she could become. Every few days, Adeline called. "Have you spoken to a realtor yet?" That was always her first question. Never, "How are you holding up?" Never, "Are you sleeping?" Never even, "Do you miss Grandpa?" Just the realtor. Willow would stare through the farmhouse window at the field Silas had loved and answer, "Not yet." Adeline would sigh as though Willow were being difficult. "You really shouldn't hold on to that place emotionally, sweetheart. It's just property. Just property." Willow repeated those words later while washing dishes at Silas's old kitchen sink. To her, the farmhouse wasn't just property. It was where Silas had taught her how to plant tomatoes. Where he'd shown her constellations from the porch. Where he'd told her that being overlooked didn't mean being unimportant. Then one afternoon, Willow opened her phone and saw a photograph Beckett had posted. He was standing outside the renovated Hartley estate, wearing an expensive suit, one hand resting casually on a luxury car. The caption read, "Grateful for the legacy I've earned." Willow stared at those words until they began to sting. Earned. She knew how easily Beckett had been praised his entire life. Every achievement was celebrated. Every mistake was forgiven. Every opportunity somehow became proof that he deserved another. Willow had spent years trying to earn the same approval and still felt like an inconvenience. She turned the phone face down on Silas's kitchen table. Then she remembered the letter. Slowly, she pulled a sticky note from the drawer and wrote the sentence that mattered most. I was never less. I was only last to be noticed. She pressed it onto the refrigerator. It was such a small thing. But standing there alone, Willow realized she wasn't writing it for her parents anymore. She was writing it for herself. And for the first time she decided that maybe being forgotten by them didn't have to mean forgetting herself. It was raining lightly the afternoon Rhodes Calloway came to the farmhouse. Willow heard 3 firm knocks and looked through the window before opening the door. A tall man stood on the porch, his boots covered in mud, a folder tucked beneath one arm. Willow Hartley? Yes. My name is Rhodes Calloway. I'm a surveyor. Willow hesitated. She had expected another realtor, another stranger ready to tell her what the farmhouse was worth before telling her what it meant. Rhodes seemed to notice her hesitation. I'm not here to buy the house. That caught her attention. He stepped beneath the porch roof and opened the folder. I've been working around this property line for several years. Your grandfather and I spoke more than once. Willow's heart tightened. You knew him. Rhodes smiled faintly. Most people around here knew Silas. But I knew him because companies kept trying to purchase mineral rights connected to this land. Willow stared at him. Mineral rights? Rhodes nodded. Your grandfather refused every offer. She glanced toward the fields. How much did they offer? Enough that most people would have signed immediately. Why didn't he? Rhodes looked directly at her. He told us the land wasn't his to give away anymore. Willow frowned. What does that mean? Rhodes reached into the folder and pulled out an old copy of a property document. He separated the mineral rights from the main property title years ago. Quietly. Legally. Willow's fingers trembled as she took the paper. Why? Rhodes paused. He talked about you. Her breath caught. Me. Every time we tried to convince him to sell, he said the same thing. Rhodes's voice softened. He said whatever was underneath that land belonged to someone who would know what to do with it besides waste it. Willow looked down at the document. For years, her family had treated her like she was incapable of making anything of herself. Yet Silas had apparently been preparing for her future long before she knew she needed one. She looked toward the fields where she'd once run barefoot beside him. For the first time, the farmhouse didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like a promise. The next morning, Willow drove into town with Silas's letter resting carefully on the passenger seat. She had barely slept. Every sentence from the night before kept replaying in her mind, especially the words about what was underneath the land. She needed someone who could tell her what was real. That person was Harlow Reyes. Harlow had been Willow's attorney for years, but more importantly, she was one of the few people who had never treated Willow like she was incapable of making decisions. When Willow entered her office, Harlow immediately noticed the exhaustion in her face. What happened? Willow placed the letter on the desk. My grandfather left this for me. Harlow read it slowly, her expression changing as she reached the final lines. Did Rhodes Calloway speak to you? Willow nodded. He said Grandpa separated the mineral rights from the property. Harlow leaned back and opened a drawer filled with old county records. Then we need to verify everything before you believe anyone. For the next hour, papers covered the desk. Harlow searched property transfers, legal filings, county records and decades-old documents connected to Silas Hartley. Then she stopped. Her finger rested on a document dated 11 years earlier. Willow. Something in her voice made Willow sit straighter. What? He did it. Harlow turned the document toward her. Silas had legally separated the mineral rights from the farmhouse property. More importantly, the rights had never been sold. Willow stared at the page, barely breathing. He never told anyone? Apparently not. Not even my parents? Harlow shook her head. He kept this incredibly quiet. Willow's eyes filled with tears. Harlow reached across the desk and gently covered Willow's hand. He knew they wouldn't understand. Willow looked at her. What do you mean? Harlow's voice softened. He knew exactly who you were, Willow. He knew you were careful. You weren't interested in showing off. You didn't chase money just because it was there. Willow swallowed hard. So he trusted me? Harlow smiled. No. He believed in you. That sentence broke something open inside Willow. She had spent years wondering why her family never seemed to see her. Now she understood. She hadn't been invisible to everyone. Her grandfather had been watching her all along. While Willow was learning what Silas had quietly protected for her, Beckett was busy pretending he had inherited a perfect life. From the outside it looked that way. He had the renovated downtown properties, the expensive car, the polished clothes, and the family praise Willow had spent her entire life chasing. Every photograph made him look successful. Every conversation with Desmond ended with the same proud smile. But behind the expensive doors, everything was beginning to crack. Beckett sat alone in his office one evening, staring at a stack of overdue notices. His fingers tightened around one of the papers as he read the amount again. He didn't have enough. The downtown properties weren't free money. They carried loans, taxes, maintenance costs, and debts that had been quietly growing for years. And much of that debt traced back to Silas. Before his death, Silas had bailed Beckett out twice after failed business ventures. Beckett had promised both times that he would recover. He never did. He said he borrowed more. Then more again. Now the properties that looked like a fortune were becoming a trap. Beckett leaned back in his chair and rubbed his face. His phone buzzed. A message from Adeline appeared. "Your father says we should talk about Willow selling the farmhouse." Beckett stared at it. He immediately understood what she meant. If Willow sold the property, the family might convince her to give them some of the money. Maybe enough to cover another problem. He typed a reply then stopped. Something about the situation frightened him. Why had Silas left Willow that farmhouse? Why had he refused to sell the land? And why was Rhodes Calloway suddenly involved? Beckett opened another folder and looked through old financial documents. His face slowly changed when he noticed something he'd overlooked years ago. Silas had transferred certain rights connected to the property long before his death. Beckett sat completely still. For the first time he wondered whether the farmhouse wasn't worthless at all. Meanwhile, Willow was sitting at Silas's kitchen table, unaware of the panic beginning to spread through the family. She thought about Beckett's caption, "Grateful for the legacy I've earned." For years she had believed those words. Now she understood something painful. Beckett hadn't earned everything. Silas had spent years rescuing him while quietly protecting Willow from the very people who kept making her feel small. Beckett had received the inheritance everyone could see. Willow had received the part nobody understood. And soon, everyone would learn which one was truly worth something. 2 weeks later, Rhodes returned to the farmhouse with a folder tucked beneath his arm and a number that made Willow's hands tremble. She had asked Harlow to sit with her because she didn't trust herself to understand what she was seeing. They were gathered around the old kitchen table, the same table where Silas had once taught Willow how to play cards. Rhodes placed the formal offer in front of her. "This is what they're prepared to pay for the mineral rights," he said. Willow stared at the figure. For several seconds nobody spoke. It was more money than she had ever imagined having. More than anything her parents had ever offered her. More than Beckett had probably expected her broken farmhouse to be worth. Her first instinct was to push the papers away. It felt too big. Too sudden. Harlow seemed to understand. "You don't have to decide because someone else expects you to," she said. Willow looked at her. "What if I make the wrong choice?" Harlow smiled. "Then it will be your choice. Not theirs." Those words stayed with Willow. All her life she had allowed other people to define her decisions. Her parents decided she wasn't ambitious enough. Beckett's success made her feel smaller. Even the farmhouse had initially felt like a sentence handed down by people who believed she couldn't do better. But Silas had never seen her that way. He had trusted her before she had learned to trust herself. Willow picked up the pen. Her hand shook. Rhodes quietly explained the terms again, making sure she understood every detail. Harlow reviewed the legal language beside her and pointed out what was protected. There was no trick. No hidden condition. No family member waiting to take it away. This was hers. Willow looked around the kitchen one last time. She could almost hear Silas laughing. "Take your time, Willow Bug." She smiled through the tears. Then she signed her name. Fully. Deliberately. Each letter felt heavier than the last, but when she finished she didn't feel afraid. She felt free. Harlow squeezed her hand. "You don't have to shrink anymore." Willow looked at the signature on the page. "No," she whispered. Outside, rain began tapping against the windows. For years she had believed being overlooked meant she wasn't enough. Now she finally understood the truth. Sometimes being underestimated wasn't the end of your story. Sometimes it was the exact reason you were free to build a life nobody else had the power to control. Word traveled quickly through town. By the end of the week, people knew Willow had accepted the offer for the mineral rights. She hadn't announced anything to her family, but in a small community, news rarely stayed private for long. 3 days later, someone knocked on the farmhouse door. Willow already knew who it was. When she opened it, Adeline stood on the porch wearing a soft smile that felt strangely unfamiliar. "Sweetheart." Willow didn't answer immediately. Her mother stepped closer and reached for her hand. "We've been worried about you." That almost made Willow laugh. For months, Adeline had only called to ask about the realtor. She had never once asked whether Willow was eating properly or sleeping at night. Now suddenly she was worried. "I'm fine," Willow said. Adeline glanced past her into the farmhouse. "It looks different. It feels different." Her mother smiled. "You know, your father and I have been thinking. Maybe we've all handled things badly." Willow folded her arms. Adeline continued. "We're family. Whatever this is, we should handle it together." There was the sentence Willow had heard countless times whenever someone wanted something from her. Family. Adeline reached for her hand again. Willow looked down at their hands but didn't move. "What exactly do you want to handle together?" Her mother's smile weakened. "Nothing specific. We just want to make sure you don't make any decisions you'll regret." "I already made my decision." Adeline's eyes sharpened. "About the property? The mineral rights?" Silence. For one brief second, Willow saw the real emotion behind her mother's expression. Not concern. Not love. Calculation. Adeline recovered quickly. "You know, money like that can disappear quickly. Your father and I have experience managing these things." Willow almost smiled. She remembered the years of being told she was irresponsible. Yet suddenly her parents were experts because she had money. "I appreciate the advice," Willow said quietly. Adeline stepped closer. "We could help you." "I know." "Then let us." Willow shook her head. "No." Her mother stared at her. It was such a small word, but it carried years of pain behind it. Adeline's expression hardened. "You've changed." Willow looked toward the fields. "Maybe I finally stopped trying to be someone you would approve of." For the first time, Adeline had nothing to say. Willow gently closed the door. She stood there for a moment, breathing slowly. Then she touched Silas's letter inside her pocket. She didn't feel guilty. She didn't feel cruel. She simply felt free. And for once, she wasn't afraid to protect what was hers. Desmond's birthday dinner was supposed to be a celebration, but Willow could feel the tension before she even sat down. Her parents had invited Beckett, a few relatives, and several old family friends. Willow almost hadn't come, but Harlow had reminded her that she didn't need to hide simply because her family had finally discovered her worth. So Willow arrived quietly, wearing a simple dress and carrying no expectations. For the first half of dinner, everything felt almost normal. Desmond laughed loudly while Beckett talked about one of his downtown properties. Adeline kept refilling everyone's glasses, smiling as though the past few weeks had never happened. Then Juniper Vance, an old family friend who worked with the county, casually mentioned the Hartley farm. "I heard the new valuation came through," she said. Willow's fork stopped. Across the table, Beckett froze. Adeline's smile disappeared. Desmond looked confused. "What valuation?" Juniper blinked, suddenly realizing she had walked into something she didn't understand. "The farmhouse property. Well, technically the land and the associated rights." Nobody moved. Beckett slowly placed his fork on the plate. "What's the valuation?" Juniper gave him the number. The room went silent. It was far beyond anything the family had imagined. Desmond stared at Willow. "How much?" Juniper repeated the figure. Adeline's face went pale. Beckett looked like someone had taken the air from his lungs. Willow didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The same people who had stood in that driveway and called the farmhouse worthless were now staring at her as though she had suddenly become someone important. Desmond cleared his throat. "Willow, why didn't you tell us?" She looked at him calmly. "Because nobody asked." The words landed harder than shouting ever could. Adeline shifted in her chair. "We were only trying to help you." Willow remembered every phone call asking whether she'd contacted a realtor. She remembered being told the farmhouse was the only thing suitable for her. She remembered Beckett's photograph and the words, "Legacy I've earned." Now she looked around the table and realized something. They weren't shocked because she had become successful. They were shocked because they had been wrong about her. Desmond's voice dropped. "We're family." Willow nodded. "I know." Then she quietly picked up her napkin and placed it beside her plate. "But being family doesn't mean you get to decide what I'm worth." Nobody answered. For the first time, Willow wasn't the invisible daughter sitting quietly at the edge of the table. She was the person everyone had finally been forced to see. That night, Willow sat alone on the farmhouse porch, the same porch where she had once cried with a cardboard box pressed against her chest. The fields stretched quietly beneath the moonlight. Fireflies drifted above the grass, blinking like tiny stars between the trees. For the first time since Silas died, the farmhouse didn't feel abandoned. It felt alive. Willow pulled his letter from her coat pocket. The paper was worn now. The edges had softened from being unfolded and reread so many times. She knew every sentence by heart, but she still opened it. Her phone buzzed. "Adeline." Willow stared at the screen. Another message appeared. "We should talk. We're family. There is still room for us to handle this together." Willow almost laughed. Months ago she would have rushed to answer. She would have explained herself, apologized, and tried to repair a relationship she hadn't broken. But she wasn't that woman anymore. She turned the phone face down beside her. Then she looked across the fields. She remembered being 7 years old, running barefoot behind Silas while he pretended he couldn't catch her. She remembered him teaching her how to fish. She remembered sitting beside him on this porch when she was afraid of leaving for college. "You don't have to be loud to matter, Willow Bug," he had once told her. At the time she hadn't understood. Now she did. She didn't need her parents' approval. She didn't need Beckett to admit he had underestimated her. She didn't need anyone at that birthday table to apologize. Silas had seen her before the world did. That was enough. Willow pressed the letter gently against her chest. "I see you too, Grandpa," she whispered. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but this time she didn't wipe them away. They weren't tears of humiliation. They weren't tears of loneliness. They were tears of release. For years, Willow had believed being overlooked was the deepest wound her family had given her. But sitting there beneath the quiet night sky, she realized it had also given her something unexpected. Freedom. They had overlooked her so completely that they never noticed what Silas had built for her. They had underestimated her so deeply that they never saw her strength growing underneath the hurt. Willow smiled through her tears. The farmhouse wasn't the punishment they had intended. It was the beginning they never imagined. She looked toward the dark fields and whispered one final time, "Thank you, Grandpa." Then she folded the letter carefully, placed it over her heart, and watched the fireflies rise into the night. If Willow's story touched you, subscribe before you go. And tell me in the comments, if your family treated you like you were worth less, would you forgive them when they finally discovered your true value?